All right, everybody, hello and welcome to the Reserve Team. I'm Sean, your host for the day, and it's another tier list, or reserve rankings for the week. Of course, last week we went through and ranked all the A-League stadiums. Thank you to everyone who watched that episode, who gave us feedback in the comment section below, or reached out on Twitter with versions of their own tier list. We have put the link to that tier list maker in the description from last week's video, and we'll be doing the same thing again today. But it's an altogether different topic, a topic near and dear to the hearts of most A-League and W-League fans, that of A-League expansion. I'm joined today by Alex Dwyer. Alex, thanks so much for joining in to help discuss one of our favourite topics when it comes to the A-League.
Yeah, no worries at all. Really keen to see what you think of the different proposed A-League expansion sides and see if we have similar sentiment about teams that could have joined or we want to see join. But yeah, excited to discuss all of them and see where they rank.
Yeah, and I think the good thing that we've got this week is we've got representatives from, like Victoria and New South Wales as well. So we've kind of got that separation of the two different areas, and most of the markets that we'll talk about, hopefully, we've got covered in one capacity or another between the two of us. Even if we don't, it's always good to get those inputs from different people around the leagues about what they think. Like New South Wales has had good success in the most recent expansion campaign. Melbourne has as well, or Victoria. We're kind of offering a different perspective based on what we know now with MacArthur and with Western United joining the division as well. So just on that quickly, we're not discussing any further the most recent A-League expansion bids. So MacArthur isn't included in this. Western United isn't included in this. We're not looking to retroactively rebook the last expansion process, but we are going to talk about some of the failed expansion bids from that 2018 process and if they would be suitable for the next round, which hopefully comes, 2020, 2021, 2022, whenever it may be. But who are the next sides that are looking to join the A-League and the W-League itself? Not necessarily trying to say we'd kick out MacArthur or we'd kick out Wellington or we'd kick out Western United or anything like that. So initial thoughts from you, Alex. What are some of your thoughts, feelings, just generally in terms of A-League expansion, perhaps in comparison with other leagues around the world, or what we know from previous expansions in the competition?
Yeah, I think a lot of what people compare us to in terms of expansion is probably the MLS. And I think that's kind of a bit of an unfair comparison because they have a lot more money invested into teams and stuff like that. But I think in the sense of the quickness in which they grow, I think we can kind of try and get to that level, hopefully at one point where we can get to, I think I'd like to see a 16-team division maybe, and then we get a second division going at the same time as well. But yeah, hopefully more expansion more quickly soon, but obviously with everything happening around the world, maybe it's not suitable at the moment. And I'd like to see a couple more teams in different places rather than more teams in Sydney and Melbourne, which we saw in the last expansion. But yeah, do you have any favourites for what might have joined the league or anything like that? Or
I do, and I'm sure we'll get through those. Maybe at the end, once we've put our list together, we'll talk through what our personal selections would be for maybe the next two clubs. But I think the comparison with the MLS and with the US is very accurate, and I know we always kind of get thrown in that bucket because we're both salary cap leagues and both leagues that tend to limit their progression or limit domination from specific clubs. I think the big advantage that the US have, one, is their population. They're about 5 times the size of Australia in terms of the population base. And then also, the media market that they have is so sports oriented, and the rights deals that they secure, even for the MLS, are huge in comparison with what we get locally and what we get internationally as well for resale value and all that sort of stuff. There aren't that many countries that I think broadcast the A-League format, but the MLS itself, it's broadcast all across North America, all across South America, all across, those key Central American markets like Mexico and wherever else that are interested in how their players are doing in that area. And then I think they've also got, I think the more impressive thing, when you look at the US map and you put club logos against where all the clubs are situated, they have a more even spread across the entire country of where teams are situated so that each region is represented. And I think that's where the key kind of similarity comes with Australia. If you look at our map, and maybe we'll get one up later in the call or later on the episode, it's very much East Coast centric and the East Coast of Australia. We don't necessarily have representation and little dots based all around the country for fans of football all across the division. And I think one of the other things that we'll talk about when we talk through a couple of these bids is the competitiveness with other codes in Australia as well. There are different spaces in Australia that nobody seems to go to as far as elite competition goes. And, maybe we'll talk about a little bit further how the A-League could potentially get ahead of the curve with that and a couple of other missed opportunities that have come up throughout the course of it. But the way we're going to split this up is we're going to do 2 rounds. Last week we were terrible at doing a quickfire round, but we're going to give it another go this week. These aren't going to be specific clubs. We may reference certain clubs when talking about expansion in these areas, but effectively they're just key markets or areas that have signalled previous interest that haven't potentially come through in the most recent round of bidding. And then we're going to split it up into a second discussion with the further bids from the 2018 failed expansions. Basically, there was a group of 15 initial bidders that was submitted as a list of 10. A couple of those were chopped out pretty early, and then there were 8 final bids, and then 6 final bids that were looked after by the FFA, of course, including Macarthur and Western United and that, who we won't be discussing any further. But we're going to pretty much put all of that group into a second, longer-term discussion, because I think there's a little bit more information about their backing and about their information relating to each of those bid groups. Hopefully, those bid groups are still interested come the next expansion. We're going to be acting as though, of course, that they are. Alex, anything else that you want to run through before we get stuck straight into the first one that we have on our list?
No, let's get into it. I'm ready to go.
Perfect. So the first one that you guys can see on your screen now, of course, Auckland. It would be the second New Zealand team. This has been broached as being a couple of different opportunities without any real formal bids coming forward. First one being Auckland City, who is a very successful New Zealand-based club. They've also finished third in the FIFA Club World Cup in previous seasons. They have a good coaching structure, a long-term Spaniard coach that's been there for quite a few seasons. They've had a few different players move into both Wellington Phoenix and other A-League sides throughout the history. And then the other one that's been mentioned previously is the Auckland Knights. Alex, what would you think a second New Zealand team may potentially offer to the league? And is Auckland, given that our previous experience with the New Zealand Knights in the first few seasons of the league, the best market to be putting them in?
I think with New Zealand, it's dangerous to put a second team in, considering a couple of years ago we almost lost the Knicks. So I think right now, potentially not. I think if the league did get to a bigger league with more teams and stuff like that, I'd be more than happy to see them in the league. And you mentioned Auckland City, who are pretty successful, generally always in the Club World Cup. So I think eventually they could get there, but I think right now, if you've got a team in Wellington that do bounce around a little bit and play some games around New Zealand as well, that is getting bigger crowds and stuff and playing some good football, I think we should stick with just that team for now, is my personal opinion.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with it. I think this one would sit around the needs improvement category, and we, of course, throughout the course of our discussion, may move other things around, and it could potentially, depending on the other bids we look at, go up to decent. I don't think it gets any further higher than that. The tough part is, for a lot of different clubs, like even as a Sydney fan, you might agree, Sydney actually improved quite a bit in terms of their off-field management and their football program once Western Sydney joined the competition. Melbourne Victory definitely became a more consistent side and a better run football club once Melbourne Heart and now Melbourne City joined the competition. There is quite a bit that pushes clubs to be better when new clubs are introduced, but I think it is tough with the Knicks. And the previous thing that's gone with Auckland is that they have failed before. So we know that it's a market that can be unsuccessful. So I think I'm a little bit wary of it. I'm thinking needs improvement. How about you?
Yeah, I'd say needs improvement. It's probably the history with the Knights previously, I think, drags it down a little bit. But I wouldn't mind seeing a New Zealand derby, and maybe they can not have to just rely on the distance derby for their only derby of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And they're going to be getting a bit of football investment with the upcoming 2023 Women's World Cup. It would be great to see. They're already pushing to get a Wellington W League side. It would be great to see them trying to introduce a second New Zealand representative in Auckland or Christchurch or any of the other cities that potentially have big football markets to try and get a W League side in as well to grow and expand their programs. But I think needs improvement. That's the perfect spot for it. The next one up on the list is a second Adelaide side. Now, a couple of different teams have been mooted before. Adelaide City was originally in the discussions way back when the first rounds of expansion came in around 2007, 2008, but never came to a formal bid. There's also been discussions around a new franchise, and there is one previous bid in the most recent round that we're looking at. What do you think a second Adelaide team may potentially add to the competition or add for the city of Adelaide and Adelaide United itself?
I'd really like to see a second Adelaide side. I think it could have potentially made more sense than a third Melbourne or Victoria-based or third Sydney-based side. Adelaide United are a pretty strong team, and I think if you add another a team into Adelaide, to create a really interesting derby over there as well. But I would love to see Adelaide in the league. Definitely, it just depends whether a bid came through that was strong enough to meet the FA's criteria and stuff like that, I guess.
Yeah, so here's what I'll suggest. I think we put this one in decent for now, and it's towards the bottom end of decent, and then maybe when we discuss further another bid later in this little process, we maybe review where we want to put second Adelaide, whether it's ahead of or alongside that other bid.
Yeah, I think so. Do you have any thoughts on what a second Adelaide would do? Or
Look, I'm a big advocate for... Look, this is where I said we weren't going to get into it, but we've gotten into the second one and I'm already getting into it again. I don't think there was many people that really thought Western United and Southwest Sydney were absolutely necessary for what is supposed to be an Australian competition. The frustration that I feel, and I'm sure a lot of people listening along with us feel as well, is that it was driven more by an outgoing FFA leadership group, including David Gallop, who was leaving anyway and wasn't going to see these teams come to fruition. And it was driven by network broadcaster preference that wasn't going to be expanded any further. That network deal ended before the teams even entered the competition. So I think when you look back, and we'll talk about this a little bit further in the expanded bids, really second Adelaide and potentially second Brisbane would have made a whole bunch of sense, but we were driven more by outside factors, including the FFA's preferences and broadcaster preferences, which perhaps counted against it. But of course, like I'm an advocate for a second Adelaide side. I think Adelaide United have been fantastic over their course of history. It would be interesting to see if the fan base expands in Adelaide with two different clubs to support, or if it effectively cannibalises some of their support. But we'll talk about that further as we get into other bids. I think decent is the right place to sit it. And I think that conversation that I've just had probably applies as well to our next entrant, which of course is a second Brisbane side to join the Brisbane Roar. What are some of your thoughts on adding a second team to the Brisbane area?
Yeah, like you said, very similar to what would be a second Adelaide team. I'd like to see it, but crowds have kind of dwindled a bit in Brisbane in recent years. Haven't really had too much success or stability, I guess, since their grand final win against the Wanderers. But I think, if you're going to have a second team in Sydney, a second team in Melbourne, eventually you want to have a second team in Brisbane and Adelaide and Perth and stuff like that. So for me, I think it'd sit in decent as well. And they've got some pretty good quality NPL sides up there too.
Yeah, I'll go along with that. I think there is a Brisbane bid, which we'll talk about further from the 2018 submissions. But yeah, I mean, sometimes, and this is that thing, it's speculation, so it's hard to say how it would actually pan out. I think sometimes Brisbane does well when they have a direct, or Brisbane Roar, I should say, does well when they have a direct competition. Like, I think their best season in terms of membership, in terms of the quality of footballs they played, was when Gold Coast was available in Queensland, when North Queensland Fury were in it, when they had that Ange Postecoglou era. That might have all been coincidental, that all those things happened around the same time. But I think for Brisbane as a one-team town competing on a national landscape, they kind of struggle to get that incentive from the football fan base to go out and support them if there aren't any local rivalries or local derbies. I think it's a scenario where Adelaide and Brisbane, it might revitalise some of their crowd numbers, it might revitalise their support, it might galvanise their membership bases a little bit if they have a local derby each year. I followed Melbourne Heart from Foundation and we were terrible. Like, we finished 10th more seasons than we finished in the finals. But every year we would get up and try and win a derby, and that was basically what our season was built around most years. So it definitely adds value to the league, but we'll talk about that one I think a little bit further as we get into some of the other bids. It's another Queensland team is the next one up, which is Cairns. Now, Cairns, as an area of far north Queensland, it's a really tough environment. They have previously had the Cairns Taipans, an NBL side in the National Basketball League, as their sole main representative in national competition. And this is one that's perhaps a bit unique, Alex, because maybe as we start looking towards a more winter-based A-League and W-League season, maybe somewhere like Cairns with its very tropical climate actually comes into the fore a little bit. It would be a tough place to play in a summer competition. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think definitely would be tough to play up there in summer. So if we did switch to winter, which is looking increasingly likely with the change for the upcoming season, I think, it could be a good spot. Is it a little too far north, and is there enough people who are going to come watch football? Maybe not. But I think for me, they'd probably be a little lower down the list. Maybe it needs improvement. But an area that could potentially sit in a second division or something like that. So for me, probably needs improvement, I think.
Yeah, I would go along with that. The trouble with this bid is that, again, they've just signalled interest previously, which might be, a mayor does a press conference and says, we'd love an A-League bid, we'd love a national team, but the actual, kind of logistics haven't necessarily gone into it yet, and the actual bid process hasn't been followed through completely. So I would, again, I think I'm agreeing with you. I think needs improvement is where we want to go. If there are bidders in Cairns, if there is a big football community that's being underrepresented, it'd be great to see them. And sometimes I think when we talk about A-League crowd sizes, we're not looking for 50,000 seat stadiums. We're looking for 10,000 or maybe 8,000. If they could get that each week, that's fantastic. That's great for the league. That makes them a sustainable market. But we've kind of put our rules together about what we're going to discuss, and I probably should have mentioned them earlier on in the call. Maybe a side like Cairns is more suitable to a national second division if that comes in, to see if they can compete at a national level, and there's less risk effectively trying to alter the A-League structure. But yeah, I think needs improvement is a good spot to put them for the moment. And they actually probably fall into a very similar category as our next topic as well, which is Darwin. Darwin, the capital of the Northern Territory. For anyone unfamiliar with the map, it's proper Crocodile Dundee territory if you're listening in from overseas. But it is also underrepresented on a national stage. It's never had any team represented in a full national competition. There have been a couple of AFL games played in Darwin over the last few years. I'm not sure if NRL games have played. I'll let you comment on those further, Alex. But again, I think an area that's kind of crying out to be involved in a national competition. But given its climate, given where it sits in the tropical nature of our country, it's one that's perhaps, again, more likely to come in a winter competition rather than the summer one.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if any NRL. I'm not too sure if any NRL's been played up there or anything like that. I think it provides a really interesting opportunity because, like you said, no professional sporting team really exists up there. And you do get an occasional travel game there from the AFL or something like that. But an area that could potentially, if you got a football team, and like you said with Cairns, if you had 8,000, 10,000 seat stadium boutique for football, it could be an area that could potentially do quite well for people to come and watch football. The only memory I have of a team from the Northern Territory playing is Sydney FC played a Northern Territory team in the FFA Cup, and so that would have been not middle of winter. Towards the end, starting to get towards spring. And it was still really, really hot. I think Sydney ran out 7-0 winners or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was Darwin Rovers. Shout out to any Darwin or Shamrock Rovers fans. So that's there's an Irish club called Shamrock Rovers, and I think it was just a bunch of Irish people in Darwin started the club. And now, a couple of years later, it's like the biggest NPL club in the country, such is their football program, and their NPL program is very much in its infancy still. So I think it is very seasonal as to who does very well. I would put this in needs improvement. I don't think it deserves to get in the bin or anything like that. But again, we throw it in a similar bucket with Cairns, where it would need more concrete investment coming forward. It would need more concrete interest. But again, it would be great to look on a map and see some representation in that big section of the country. But yeah, it's not quite where we need it to be just yet. But one that potentially might be where we want it to be is the next bit that we're going to have a look at, which is Geelong, based down in the southwestern suburbs of Victoria. It is the second largest city in Victoria as well. Potentially was one that came through in the last bid process, but a formal bid never actually came to fruition in the final 15 submitted. It's been under a couple of different names, Victoria Patriots, and really now Geelong is the home base of Western United, but it's proving difficult for Western United in their own struggles. Alex, from a New South Wales perspective, from a Sydney perspective, what do you know about Geelong and how it would suit an A-League bid?
So, like you said, it's very close to where Western United is now based, correct?
Yeah, so Western United currently playing their games out of GMHBA Stadium, which is based down in Geelong. But the challenge that they've got, and we have spoken about it a couple of different times in different podcasts last week with the stadiums, is that if you're living in Geelong, you don't really want to go and watch a team that's going to leave you in a year's time when their stadium's built. That's going to be effectively an hour and 20 minutes away. And the thing about where they're building the Western United Stadium, and it's yet to come into fruition just yet, is there's no infrastructure to get there. You have to drive out to the middle of a paddock in the middle of nowhere. There's no trains, there's no buses, there's nothing. If we were to bring it up on Google Maps right now, it's literally a paddock. There's a dirt road that goes out to it. This is the muted site, but no ground's been broken, no infrastructure developments which are required from the state government. They can't be you can't build a train line independently. I think it'll be a long time before Western United actually gets its ground. And maybe this is what, again, I said we weren't going to do. If you get into retroactive kind of rebooking expansion, I think Geelong's bid looks a lot stronger if Western United have, been a bit more clear about the timeline to actually build their stadium, because the infrastructure's already there. They have a huge footballing community as well. I'd compare it with similar to Wollongong, who we'll discuss further later. Probably similar to Townsville in that they have their own thriving football community in and around the Geelong area. But the challenge that comes with them is that we've already got, now 3 Melbourne sides. adding a fourth one.
Yeah.
It's if you are a diehard football fan, you're probably already supporting an A-League team in and around Geelong. I'm not sure how much that market would have to offer in terms of new eyes coming to the football product. So I think if it was you were asking me, I would put it bottom end of decent, maybe top end of needs improvement.
Yeah, I think for now, probably bottom end of decent. I don't know too much about Geelong, like in terms of their footballing community and stuff like that, but it sounds like they have a strong community in terms of that. And if West United weren't there, then maybe they'd be a little higher up. But now I'd probably see them more like pushing from a second division up towards the A-League. I don't think they'd be getting an A-League license, but I would like to see them if West United are going to move away an hour and a half away, then I think it's an area that could really benefit from an A-League team.
Yeah, for sure. I think bottom end of decent is fair representation for now. As always, as we discuss other bids, we can move some stuff around as we need to.
Yeah.
Jumping forward, and it's another second side for a big city in the country, it would be a second Perth team joining. Now, a couple of different times this has been mentioned by different people. There was, in the most recent bids for expansion in the league, a Fremantle bid, which is a suburb just to the west of Perth itself. Obviously, West Coast Eagles and Fremantle Dockers have kind of a storied history in the AFL as being two competitors and two derbies in that state. I think Fremantle is a big town in Perth, or it is a very nice coastal city in the area. It is always viewed as being the next biggest place to Perth. But in reality, there's quite a few different places that could come forward in Perth. Perth Soccer Club is a huge club in and around the Perth area and their local NPL scene. South Perth has also been mooted as a location. It's split by the Swan River. They would kind of love to have, I think, separation of a north side of the river and a south side of a river team because it's a very big growing area. Just from an outsider's perspective, Alex, what are some of your thoughts on adding a second Perth team to the league itself?
I think it'd be pretty good. For me, it'd be up there in terms of a team that needs to join. Just to give more representation on the West Coast, because like you said at the start, there's so many teams on the East Coast. So I'd love to see another team in Perth. I think it would really create an awesome derby over there as well. And there's a lot of people who love sport in Perth as well. So whether it be a Fremantle team or a team south of the river or something like that, I think it would work. I think they've got the infrastructure in Perth to do it as well. So yeah, I think it'd be a pretty strong bid. It just depends on which team was bidding for it and how much investment they get, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would put this one in decent, and I would put it just ahead of Geelong, but just behind Brisbane as things currently stand, like if we put these in order as well. The only reason I say that is, and what we mentioned it earlier, making the transition towards a winter league. If you're trying to compete with the West Coast Eagles, which is the main club in Western Australia, and Fremantle, which is, the second highest supported club, Perth Glory is already going to have their own challenges about moving to a winter competition. And while, yes, I think Perth Glory needs to be pushed a little bit in terms of their administration, in terms of the way their clubs run, in terms of their football program, I think it would be a bigger challenge than Adelaide and Brisbane adding another winter team to that competition. So I think decent is perfect for it. Obviously, we'd want to see further details around what that bid actually looks like, but I would put it just behind the other two just because, it's kind of a one-town side of the country, that entire western half of the continent. So that's the only reason that I would sit it in that spot.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough.
Cool. All right, the next one, and I think, and I'll let you go probably first on this one, I think our first candidate for, probably towards the bottom end of this highlight list, but is Southeast Asia. Apparently, and this is only speculation, we have no evidence to back it up, this was an idea previously rejected by Frank Lowy in between 2006 and 2010. Where certain clubs had signalled an interest in playing games in Southeast Asia. Certain Southeast Asian clubs had the idea to represent potentially within the A-League itself. We have seen different NBL clubs throughout the years, like in Singapore. A few other different teams have had interest before in the likes of Indonesia, Malaysia, even Vietnam, I think, is the furthest to the west that we actually went. But it's also been previously mooted by Tony Sage, the Perth Glory owner, who probably elicits a lot of mixed responses from people in and around the league itself. Southeast Asia is an idea. Alex, what are you thinking as far as A-League expansion is concerned?
I think it can get in the bin. I don't understand the need to expand past like Australia and New Zealand. I'd be putting a team in New Zealand before I put a team in Southeast Asia, definitely. They have their own leagues, they have their own teams. And I mean, a lot of A-League players are jumping over to India and stuff like that. So they have money to pay their players and things like that. So obviously people are watching it. So like, why do we need to add a team? Like, are we going to be interested in it? Probably not. Are they going to be interested in it? Probably not.
This one screams to me like, and for years in football, we've had the issue of not having enough, and this is air quotes because it's a vague term, but football people involved in key decision making. This screams to me like a businessman's idea of what would work for the league, because he's certain that he can secure sponsorships in Indonesia, or he can secure, better, like kit production deals out of Vietnam or Bangladesh or somewhere like that. This screams to me of being a business decision rather than being anything that's going to benefit football in any way. And while the idea of, like a Vietnam away day might be fantastic as an experience, this is straight in the bin, and this is bottom of the get in the bin. I would happily call the list here and say nothing's going to finish lower than this, because it's just, it's not a feasible idea. It's already challenging enough with the logistics travelling between Australia and New Zealand, adding additional international travel and the concerns that come with that for international players, all that sort of stuff. It would be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, I don't think it would do very much for the league. I think you're right. Business decision over football, that one.
Yeah, the toughest one is always to put that first get in the bin bid in, but we've ripped that Band-Aid off, and hopefully most of them are relatively positive.
That made the job easy for us.
It makes the job very easy. The next one, though, a little bit closer to home, is the Sunshine Coast. Now, the Sunshine Coast has an existing state league team, not an LPL team, in the area. They have a fantastic stadium available, a very big sports ground that has one big stand, and they have previously mooted both the local council and the Sunshine Coast FC club that they have a long-term strategy to try and join the A-League and to redevelop that ground into a proper boutique rectangular 12 to 15,000 seat stadium. There isn't much further detail on this bid, to be completely transparent with you, Alex. It's just one that's previously been called out as being a key market in Queensland, and they have signalled previous interest, albeit at a very basic stage, not submitting a bid. Are you familiar with the Sunshine Coast area, and where would you look to place it as far as A-League expansion is concerned?
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with the area. I wouldn't say it like it's pretty close to Brisbane. It's not too far away, and similar area to the Gold Coast as well. An area that, like, I guess because it is close to the Gold Coast, an area that has kind of it's not really their area, but a general location that has failed in the A-League. Whether that's because of mismanagement from their owner and stuff like that, I'm not too sure. But I think it's a team that could potentially one day get there. But for me, it probably needs a bit of improvement. I probably want to see a Brisbane team before that, I think, or at least a proper bid and like real interest rather than just a casual. We'd like to do it one day, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I think maybe we're starting, now that we've got some bids on the board and we're kind of discussing it more broadly as a holistic approach. When we talk about the Sunshine Coast, it's not that it's a bad bid. It's not that we're against any particular region coming into the league. It's just in terms of prioritisation of who we'd want to see, I don't think it's there. I think I'd put this down towards bottom of needs improvement, just because there are bids that are already on the board and bids that we're going to discuss further as they come up throughout this episode that are preferential to the bid, that are stronger than the bid. And while it's probably unfair to compare them all because they're not all on the same footing in terms of their history in football and their history in bids themselves, I would rather see Darwin, Cairns, Auckland added before I would look at a Sunshine Coast team. So needs improvement. Does that sound all right for you?
Yeah, that works for me.
We're all aligned so far. There's definitely going to be ones that we probably butt heads on, but thankfully we're getting through it pretty easily thus far. Jumping forward to the next one, which is Townsville. Now, Townsville already has a storied history in the A-League. Previously, North Queensland Fury were one of the original expansion sides, joining the competition with Gold Coast United. They didn't have the best time of it. They were poor on the pitch. They were poor off the pitch. Their biggest, perhaps, movement was Robbie Fowler coming to Australia, for better or worse, late in his playing career, mainly viewed for him as being a time to increase his property portfolio. He opened a whole bunch of different units and townhouses and apartments in and around the Townsville area. So it was, I think, financially beneficial for him. But they didn't really offer a whole lot to the league. They ran at a loss every day that they were open as a club. They had quite a bit of support from the FFA. This is a tough one because it's not that I don't want to see Townsville represented at some point on a national stage, but similar to what we just spoke about with Sunshine Coast, I think they've had an opportunity and it hasn't worked out. So I'm kind of looking at them a little bit more negatively because there are other places I would rather see get the opportunity before we look at that Townsville market again. What is first some of your memories of the North Queensland Fury, if you remember them being in the league? Because it was only like a blink of an eye. And what are some of your thoughts on them coming back into the league in the future?
The only thing I can associate with them being in the league is Robbie Fowler. Other than that, I don't really remember too much of them. But I have to agree. I think that they've had their turn. It didn't work out too well. So we might be being a bit harsh on them. They may come back with a much stronger bid, and it could be very successful. But I'd like to see another town or another city given the opportunity over them, considering it didn't work out very well last time. How long did they last in the league? It was, like you said, a blink of an eye, wasn't it?
I think it was 2 seasons, but I think their second season, and I probably should, a good host would have gone and looked this up beforehand, but I haven't. I think it was 2 seasons, but then it was very early on in their second season that it was kind of, the writing was on the wall that they weren't going to continue the season after, and it was officially announced, I think, once they were guaranteed to finish towards the bottom of the league. Once they knew finals were out of the picture, they weren't looking to continue it on any further. And I think the challenge that they also had is there weren't many local investors. I think there were football people from around Australia trying to take a team to Townsville. And again, it may have been driven by business people looking at that as a growth market rather than the local Townsville community trying to maintain and sustain their own community. I'll give them credit, right? And this is what I think keeps them out of getting the bin, is that the club, Northern Fury, is a Phoenix club of North Queensland Fury, where the club has continued and is now playing in NPL competition. So it hasn't disappeared entirely. There is obviously still a need and desire within that community, but I think it goes towards the bottom and needs improvement just based on the other bids deserving an opportunity before we revisit old failed markets.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the fact that they still have a team that exists under a similar name could see them in a second division, and I like seeing them pop up in and around the FFA Cup as well. But I think down towards the bottom of needs improvement just because of history. But not, I wouldn't put them in getting the bin. Yeah, I think I agree with you.
Yeah, cool. So that actually, again, we didn't do a great job of doing our quick fire round, but it's very easy. It's a slippery slope when it comes to talking about A-League expansion to start discussing the bids a little bit further. We are moving forward to actual bid submissions from the 2018 expansion process, which saw Macarthur Western United join the division. So we are moving to specific club discussions or specific bid discussions. Each of these clubs usually had a representative badge or they had a representative logo or whatever else. We are now getting a bit more specific. It's not generally the market, it's the actual strength of that previous bid and if we would like to see them come forward. So you will see a couple of additional ones. The first one, of course, here, Brisbane City. We have already spoken about our want and need for a second Brisbane side to join the competition. But a bit of background for anyone that wasn't familiar with the bid. They were the only bid that was submitted from the initial 15. After the Brisbane Strikers dropped out, both sides had initially disclosed that they were happy to join an expanded A-League competition, but I think Brisbane City had a better time getting the finance for it. And I think one of the big struggles, and we might talk about this further with some of the other bids, is when you've got multiple bids from the same city, they tend to take funding away from each other, and they tend to make it difficult for local government, councils type government, state government, whoever else, to commit money to that project because they're effectively picking one or the other out of bids. So I think Strikers dropping out helped the Brisbane City bid. They had plans to redevelop the Ballymore, which is the home of NRL in Queensland, I think, as an 18,000 seats venue to support the club. They were initial favourites for a second city derby in Brisbane, with already decent infrastructure and investment in place both in the existing Brisbane City competition. There were concerns about Brisbane Roar's ownership at the time. They were owned by the Indonesian-backed Bakri Group at the time and were having trouble paying their players on time. And as you've already mentioned, Alex, when we spoke about the second Adelaide team earlier, they were experiencing, for the Brisbane Roar, some dwindling crowds after their most successful period. And I think in the end, that probably counted against the bid itself. But looking forward to the future, where do you think Brisbane City's strength lies and what would you want to see from a bid coming from Brisbane as a second club to join?
I think they had a pretty decent bid. I think Ballymore was a really good plan. It's a stadium that does need development. I think also Rugby Union share it with them as well. So I think they had a bit of backing from Queensland Rugby Union. I think their plan was maybe to work together to redevelop it because they would be both using it. Whether Queensland Rugby Union only use it as a training centre, I'm not too sure. I think the Reds have played a couple of games there before, but they generally play out of Suncorp. But I think, 18,000 is perfect. It's not too big. It's a stadium that could get a half full, maybe just over initially to start with. And they were backed by businessmen. They were backed by an ex-local politician. So I think it was a pretty good bid. And then just, I'm not too sure what happened with it. It just kind of fell off. And Yeah, but I think it's a team that has a bit of history. They're pretty well established in the community. They've got a lot of participation in youth teams and stuff like that. They already play in the NPL as well, I think. So yeah, a team that has a bit of history and stuff, and I think a team that could have been pretty decent in the league.
Yeah, I would put them. Here's what I'll suggest. Right, let's put them in decent. Let's put them just ahead of this second Brisbane bid because they are an actual bid that has signalled interest before. They were included on the initial 15, but didn't make it to the round of 10, didn't make it to the round of 8 or the final 6. So there's obviously something that's kind of lacking a little bit in terms of their bid, whether that's just comparatively with the others that we'll talk through. But I think maybe what we do is we put them here with second Brisbane, and then maybe once we get to the end of the list, we look at revisiting second Brisbane and second Adelaide, which we'll get to in a moment, and see which of those bids is probably higher, and maybe we look at how we're going to measure those two. But I think decent is good. Obviously, there's some challenges that we'll talk about further with a couple of our other clubs about connecting old football and new football. All the A-League clubs, of course, new clubs created for the expansion of the league. It will be interesting to see in the future if any of the old clubs are brought in, how they kind of try and connect that old football and new football, the old history of the national game. Jumping forward to, I think a lot of people's sentimental favourite though, is Canberra United. Of course, Canberra United has been a strong home for football over the last few years. They have direct ties with the AIS. They already have a W League side, which has been representing in the competition for quite a few seasons. They have ongoing ACT government support and already ready-made stadiums in the area that host the ACT Brumbies in the national rugby competitions or the Super Rugby competitions. And they also have a variety of different locations available to them at different universities and whatever else for training bases, including the AIS complex, which could potentially be leveraged for further development in addition to their existing programs. The biggest doubt they have is the financial muscle in the area. The nation's capital has a good football pedigree, but it's a relatively small competition comparatively with the other states, and they don't traditionally compete in New South Wales-based competitions or in any interstate competitions. It's very much Canberra one-town centric in terms of the overall depth of the competition. Interestingly, though, this bid had some really good ideas. They were going to be part of the Bundesliga-style ownership model in principle with a 50 plus 1. So that's 50% of the ownership plus 1% of the ownership going to fan groups. A variety of different fan groups, not all as one particular majority, but it would give the community in and around the club the majority voting rights, and it really already has most of the investment required for the infrastructure itself. So there wouldn't be that many things that the fans needed to vote on, but they would at least be able to have a large input, probably larger than any of the other A-League clubs, about the overall direction of the club and where they're heading. They already have experience at the national level with the women's side, which I think is a huge plus for them. But their biggest attraction is that Capital Football, similar to Football New South Wales, Football Victoria, the governing body for football in the region, had highlighted that they had no desire at all to own or operate an A-League side. They mainly wanted to focus on their local regional competitions. So anything in Canberra or in the ACT itself would have to be operated independently as, Canberra United for A-League or Canberra for A-League, which I think is fine, but it is always difficult when your main football institution in that state isn't necessarily willing to contribute either financially or further. So this one was included in the final 8 bids. Alex, what are some of your thoughts on Canberra as an expansion side? And their expansion push, their desire to get in the competition is still ongoing as we speak.
Yeah, I think they've been one of the probably longest. It's been a bunch of different bids, but probably one of the towns, cities that has been pushing for an A-League team for quite some time. Probably one of my favourite bids. It's pretty unusual you get a sporting league that doesn't have a team in the nation's capital where that sporting league exists. I guess it is a bit different with Canberra, as it's the capital, but it's not really one of the major cities in terms of people travelling to visit and stuff like that, so you don't get as much tourism and things like that. But I think, for me, one of my favourite bids, a team that definitely could have got a license. I mean, they've been pushing for Central Coast's potential license in recent time as well. So they obviously haven't given up. I really like their Bundesliga style ownership that they were going to push for as well. I think that's really good, gives the fans a say, and it seems to work very well in the Bundesliga. They've already got an active support, which has been established for quite some time as well. So I think it works. They've got a W League team, which generally, I'm not sure if the bid was connected to the W League team or not, but I guess they would connect if the team did get an A League license. But it's very rare that that you get the W League license before you get an A League license. But yeah, for me, it just makes sense.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing. Like, Canberra is a strange city, and for those of you not familiar with Australia, Sydney and Melbourne couldn't decide which of us was going to be the capital of Australia. So what they did was effectively found a location in between both. And Canberra was set up as basically just a politician's town. There's not a whole lot else there. There's a couple of big museums. There's a couple of big universities there now as well. But it's effectively a place that most of the year is relatively quiet, relatively sleepy. But then during, like the main political times throughout the course of a year, the main meetings, it does get quite busy. But it does still have a good football pedigree. I think what's interesting and what we don't get visibility on, and what I don't quite understand relating to this bid, is they've had a functioning W League side that has competed and done very well in that competition. Like, I don't know what the deal is with their relationship with the FFA. I would have thought they applied to be a part of an expanded competition in 2008, in 2010, in 2015, in 2018, and they actually, back on the 25th of August in 2020, submitted a new bid to the FFA to say that we want to be included in the next expansion, whether that's part of the National Second Division or an expanded A-League competition, because that framework isn't quite there as to how teams go about trying to join outside of, asking for bids. What I don't understand, though, is why this isn't always looked at as being the next step. Like, they've got a W League side, they've got great infrastructure with their relationship with the AIS. They really should be, I think, already in the league, and should have been a side that was added back when Western Sydney were added, back when Melbourne Heart were added. But for whatever reason, they just are continually overlooked, and I'm not sure what it is as far as the shortfall is concerned in terms of the bids they're submitting. I think, Alex, this is our first All-Star pick. And I think it goes in the top tier. Yeah, so I think we throw this one up there, get Canberra in A-League. It makes sense. They've got everything that you could possibly need for a bid. Just because it's not in a massive media market, just because it's not obviously the richest bid, and we could probably rant for 2.5 hours, Alex, about the bid fees that are paid and the bid fees that were paid by Western United and MacArthur. They effectively paid the most of any club to get their licenses. Like, they should be in a national competition, and it would give us such a leg up on the other codes in and around Australia. AFL is not based there. The NRL has the Canberra Raiders, who I don't think would cannibalise too much of our market. They don't have NBL representation. There's a whole bunch of stuff that would really go into having a fantastic Canberra United bid.
Yeah, definitely. Great place for sport as well, like you mentioned with the AIS and stuff like that. It's a perfect place to base yourself out of.
Yeah, so hopefully, if anyone from the FFA is listening, tick that box, put it on, get it on the next ballot. The next one, and again, it's a return to a club that's previously had experience in the A-League itself. It's Gold Coast United FC. Now, this is very different from the Gold Coast United FC that you maybe represented previously in the league, which was owned by, shithead billionaire Clive Palmer, which I'm not ashamed to say at any point. But in August 2017, after the folding of the previous club, it was announced that Gold Coast United FC had been reformed with a different ownership group, a different committee, a different badge, effectively a different organisation to represent the Gold Coast region in the Queensland NPL. As part of that club's revival, their chairman, Danny Marr, announced that the club had intentions to re-enter the A-League and the W League, which included a submission in the initial bid list of those first 15 that came through. It wasn't included in the final 10 and the final 8 bids considered by the FFA, and there were ongoing concerns about funding for football in the region with bid sponsors not necessarily the most lucrative sponsorships available. And also, I think one of the big challenges that they had is previous sponsorships that had been involved in and around the original Gold Coast United bid were a bit wary to support another club due to their poor experiences with the Palmer-owned Gold Coast bid of previous years. Alex, what's some of your familiarity with football on the Gold Coast, and how would you feel about another Gold Coast opportunity being given to a side in the league?
I kind of feel a little bit sorry for them because of potential mismanagement by Clive Palmer. I think that's what probably could have killed their chance off of surviving in the league a little bit earlier on when they were part of it. I think it's a team that could potentially do well, but will the fans go again? Like you said, will the sponsors trust them? Will they do well? I think their history probably haunts them a little bit too much for it to be a bid that sits quite high up. I like the fact, similar to North Queensland Fury, I like the fact that they've returned from the ashes, you could say, and rebuilt their club and haven't tried to rebrand or anything like that too much. But I think, I think it's probably more suited to a second tier rather than being put straight into the league.
Yeah, I mean, in the interest of fairness, we counted against Townsville not getting a second opportunity compared to some of the other bids. And if we're looking at Queensland football as a whole, my preference would be to see a second Brisbane team introduced, and then to see, potentially Cairns looked at, potentially Sunshine Coast looked at, and then you get back to Townsville and the Gold Coast. So I'm not saying it's a weak bid. I'm not saying that football doesn't have a place. I think the second tier shout that you've just made is a fantastic one. But I think we put it right here, maybe just ahead of Townsville, but right there alongside Townsville as not a bad bid, not something that we don't want to see for the league, but we probably owe all these other bids the opportunity to prove themselves on a national stage before we start revisiting Gold Coast. But I think they could definitely be a side that goes into a second national tier as one of the first ballot teams to go into that group. And if they get promoted, fantastic. They've earned it from a footballing perspective as well as an operational perspective, rather than being given an A-League license and hope that they overcome any doubts that we might have. Do you think that placing is okay?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I'd put them and Townsville pretty much together.
Perfect. All right, jumping forward to our next one. And again, we're up in Queensland. This is Western Pride FC. So basically, I've used this logo because they are an existing club, but this was originally a bid based out of Ipswich, where Western Pride is based. Also known as the West Brisbane bid. There were bids from Western Brisbane groups in 2012, 2014, and the final 2018 bids. Expansion into the western suburbs seems to come up with every big city: West Adelaide, Western Melbourne, Western Sydney Wanderers, and the western suburbs of Brisbane has been no different. And they're boosted by a huge growth in population in and around the Ipswich area, the largest town or miniature city in the western suburbs of Brisbane itself. Previous Ipswich Mayor Paul Pisale, I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. Paul, if you're watching, let me know how to pronounce it in the comment section below. But he promised in August 2013 as part of his platform that he would build a 15,000 seat stadium at North Ipswich Oval, which I'm a bit wary of the word oval. EFA licence was secured for a national competition. The region's bid for an A-League expansion position is further helped by the strong community ties with the current NPL Queensland side Western Pride, who you can see their logo on the screen now. And the bid was included in the 8 bids considered by the FFA in August 2018, though it was later rejected when they cut it further down to the final 6. I think this is potentially the strongest of the Queensland bids that we have available. What are some of your thoughts and opinions on an Ipswich/West Brisbane side joining the league?
I think it'd be interesting. I think they've been pretty successful in the NPL, and it gives you a little bit of difference in terms of just basing a second team in Brisbane. You can base a team just on the outskirts, so you get a bit of difference in terms of supporter base and stuff. You don't have to worry about the teams killing each other off in terms of losing fans. The promise to build a stadium or an oval, I don't know how much you can read into that. I think I'd like to see a bit more guaranteed promises to build infrastructure and build a training base and stuff like that. But I think it could work. They're a pretty successful NPL side, and I assume people will come and watch. It just depends how, on the infrastructure and stuff like that, and if they continue to get the backing to come into the league.
Yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head with that portion there. I think what we've learned from the A-League and its previous expansions is that if you don't have a defined area, it can be a real struggle to build your own fan base. I think one of the challenges that we've got in Melbourne in particular is that it's Melbourne Victory and Melbourne Heart, or Melbourne City now. There aren't any divides as to what region they're from. They don't represent a particular group. The vague messaging about what team they actually are, it struggles for them to create their own identity. I think one of the big criticisms that Melbourne City cops quite a bit is that they don't have a recognisable identity. I think they are building it over time, but it is tough unless you have that direct regional tie. I think we learned when Western Sydney came in and immediately had fantastic, very vociferous support in the Parramatta, Western Sydney region. If you put a specific region into a bid, it can actually help quite a bit in terms of creating that club identity, in terms of getting people involved and invested from day one. What I think this benefits it against is that if you've got Brisbane City versus Brisbane Roar, it's like, okay, but where in Brisbane are they from? I don't know where Ballymore's based. Let's pretend it's in the northern suburbs. Maybe they become the northern team and Brisbane becomes the southern team as far as that's represented. But I think if you bring in West Brisbane or you bring in Ipswich, it immediately identifies with a local area. People that maybe Brisbane supporters already may now identify better with Ipswich. I think it has a stronger bid just by it has that stronger cultural and regional area. So I would put it just ahead of Brisbane City, if that's roughly where you're thinking in the decent category.
Yeah, I think so too. The fact that they made it further than Brisbane City as well probably bodes well for them. And like you said, there seems to be something about West and football that seems to work. So I think it could be pretty decent.
Yeah, we probably could have doubled up on all these tiles if we just put West Geelong or West Perth or West Brisbane or West Adelaide, but that's probably a future episode. We don't want to spoil that future content. Now we do move forward to another bid in Melbourne again, and maybe one of the things that we need to talk about here is the amount of teams that are currently in Melbourne and currently in Sydney, or New South Wales and Victoria, as the largest states are concerned. But it's South East Melbourne / Team 11, as the bid team was called. This was originally the favourite for expansion. I'm going to read you out some figures here. 89 grassroots clubs, more than 12,000 registered players, 156 nationalities represented in the community, and a population of over 1.2 million. No other region in Australia can compete for population base or for the endorsements received in the bid itself. No better region in Australia is better represented across that nationality divide as well. Local councils supported it, clubs supported it, Socceroos from the area itself supported it. The likes of Vince Grella from previous Socceroos seasons, current Socceroo Jackson Irvine, current Socceroo Bailey Wright, all from the southeast Melbourne area. It is a massive area. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with it, Alex, but when we say southeast Melbourne, it's really vague. It's basically like the whole kind of section of a suburb and section of a state. The big if that they had, though, the big challenge that they struggled to overcome, what I think eventually counted against them, was their funding required for their stadium. As we mentioned previously, when you have different bids coming from similar areas in and around cities, it's very difficult to secure state and federal funding. And they really needed funding. They didn't have the backing to build their own stadium, but they had previously signalled that Dandenong, one of the biggest cities in Melbourne itself, was going to be the location right next to Dandenong train station and rail station. There is a facility available that was available, but they needed state government funding, they needed federal government funding. And if you were going to compare this bid with Western United's that was ultimately successful, one was willing to pay for their own stadium but doesn't have the infrastructure. One had the infrastructure but couldn't pay for their own stadium. And really the state government didn't pick one side or the other in Victoria. They were waiting to see who was awarded the license as to who they were going to throw their support around. Obviously, it's very different now in 2020 with coronavirus and lockdown and everything that's happened down here to the discussions we had in 2018. But what were some of your thoughts, feelings on Team 11 as an expansion bid and some of your background when we were talking through these things in 2018, Alex?
Yeah, like you said at the start, I remember them coming out pretty early on, signalling their interest and being one of the front runners. Doing some research for this episode, a lot of the articles I found from 2018 talked about how this was one of the front runners. These guys are probably going to be in the A-League if the Melbourne team gets a license. And then, the funding, I guess, for their stadium just ended it for them. But they had all the right plans in place. They were going to be just outside. It's just outside central Melbourne, correct?
Yeah. So probably, if you're traveling from the city, probably 40 minutes south.
Okay.
But for quite a few people that live in the suburbs, particularly the southeastern suburbs in that region, for them to get into the city, it takes upwards of an hour and a half. Plus, then you got to drive back. If they were heading to Dandenong instead, it's well serviced by rail services. It's well serviced by, road infrastructure that can get you from the southeastern suburbs to Dandenong quicker than you can get to the city. It allows probably 1.2 million people in that area that don't have a local team to support in a national competition and potentially would struggle financially, socioeconomically, whatever else, to get into the city and to buy a membership, to actually have a team in their town, which is the interesting portion with it. What I will say is, similar to Canberra as well, this bid is ongoing. So this bid team still exists. They're still pushing to try and get added to the league. They still have the support of those 89 grassroots clubs in and around the Dandenong area. They're still really pushing. I have to call out my own bias here, because if you had asked me in 2018 who I thought was guaranteed to get in, this was one of the sides. So potentially, Alex, I'm going to hand this one over to you. If it was me, I'd be putting it in All-Star, but behind Canberra and behind a couple other bids that we'll talk about in the future. But I could potentially see it sitting in the decent category, because we're now in a situation where we have 3 Melbourne teams. Do we really need a 4th? And I think that'll come up with a couple of the other bids as well. I would completely understand why people would say we don't need any more Melbourne sides, and I kind of begrudgingly agree with that portion of it. So I'm going to let the fate of Team 11 is in your hands.
I think I would have potentially put it into All-Star if Western United hadn't been given a license. And so say like a team from somewhere else in Australia had been given a license, excluding Team 11 and Western United, then I would potentially put them into All-Star. But I think the fact that there's now 3 Melbourne teams, I mean, it's its own area. It would probably still get support. I'd like to see other teams get the license instead. And also, one thing that is a little black mark for me, what would be their name? Are they going to run with Team 11? Because I don't think I can run with Team 11 being in the league.
They couldn't because it's not the 11th team in the league anymore, and that was what it was phrased around. There were 10 teams. They were going to be Team 11, the first expansion side. So they would either become Team 13 or they would probably pick something like Southeast Melbourne or
Dandenong City or something.
Or Dandenong, yeah. So Dandenong City, if there are any fans, please start deleting your comments. We know you already exist, but it would be something to that effect. Like maybe Southeast United, because Western United is apparently whatever region Western United's in, and that's what we do at the moment. Maybe it's West, Southeast or something like that, just to get that West in. Look, I think everything you've said is fair. I think we have to, on the basis of being impartial, reporters for the reserve team, have to kind of throw this one maybe alongside Geelong as a good bid, a very strong bid, but I don't think we could preferentially put it in over a second Perth, second Brisbane or second Adelaide side, given that we want football to be represented all across Australia and New Zealand, not just within the biggest states available. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think they're a very strong team, and if there was space in Melbourne for them and Melbourne hadn't got a license, then I would have put them a lot higher up. But I think now that you've got 3 teams there, it just makes sense to give other cities a shout.
Yeah, absolutely. So from one relatively new Melbourne side to a very old Melbourne side, we moved down to South Melbourne, of course, powerhouse of the NSL era, Oceanic team of the millennium or whatever it was back in 2000. They were, of course, a very big component of the old National Soccer League way back in the day. This is seen as being the bid that potentially brings old soccer and new football together, linking both the NSL era and the A-League era. They have a decent men's and women's football program, being one of the biggest sides in Victorian competition, still towards the top of the NPL each season. Huge junior programs as well, very expensive junior programs, if anyone's familiar with their NPL program locally. And they have their own stadium, Lakeside Stadium in Albert Park, which they have access to. They have a long-term lease with Athletics Victoria, which would see them secure that stadium. It can fit, I think, 8,000 people at capacity. The FFA doubt was that South's ability to bring new eyeballs and dollars to the league like other bidders. They have a lot of their own cash. They're a huge representative of the Greek community in Melbourne. But the concern would be, and I would echo this concern as well as a fan in the region, they're really only going to be bringing back old NSL supporters of South Melbourne. I don't think, and I'm happy to be proven wrong in the comment section below if you disagree, that any Melbourne Victory fans or Melbourne City fans would be looking to jump ship and go to South Melbourne. It would purely be bringing back an older fan group from not a bygone era, but from the past. They did make very public commitments about quite a few different things. There wasn't necessarily verification if they had the funds to do this or if they had contracts signed, but they'd highlighted marquee signings like Ronaldinho back in the day. They highlighted marquee coaches, including Roberto Carlos, who apparently made a verbal agreement to come and coach South Melbourne if they made the A-League, despite having no coaching experience previous to that. They were included in the final 8 bids, though, so there must have been some sort of reality to the financing that they had, and there must have been some sort of reality to the option that they were presenting the FFA in the expansion process. Alex, from a Sydney perspective, what are some of your memories of South Melbourne, and what do you think they would potentially bring the league itself?
I think I'd like to see them in the league one day. I think, one of the strongest NPL clubs in terms of history in football, and one of the strongest NSL clubs as well. I think they were 4-time champions of the NSL. They've been pushing for A-League expansion for a very, very long time. Whenever expansion gets talked about, they throw their name in the ring. There's lots of fans on Twitter talking about it as well. Their stadium, I like the fact they have a stadium. They have a long lease, like you said. It has an athletics track around it, which isn't ideal. Which is, it's great they have a stadium. They don't have to go build anything, so I guess it saves them from that. But having an athletics track is probably almost as bad as having an oval. Probably worse than having an oval, because it's an oval and you have an athletics track between the ground as well.
Yeah, so there is a cynicism here for me, and I probably need to get it out of my system, and then once I've said it, I'll feel better about it. I don't know if... So they do. You're exactly right. Every time there is an A-League expansion talk, they're always the first ones to start talking about how they should be in the league. I don't know if that's necessarily reflective of their suitability to go in the league, and if it's just them saying, well, it should be us. If it's going to be anyone, it should be us, because they say it every time. I don't think they've had that strong of bids previously. I think this most recent bid in 2018 is potentially their strongest, given that they had just signed the long-term lease with Victoria and Athletics. They're guaranteed, I think, like $2 or $3 million a year based on that leasing agreement. They Also, yes, they have a very vociferous soccer Twitter representation. SMFC Mike is probably already sending me shit on Twitter as we speak. But I don't know if it's necessarily reflective of an overall fan base. Like, I think it's very easy on social media to see 4 or 5 very vocal accounts typing in all caps lock and thinking, look at this passionate support. But the reality is probably very different. There are better supported NPL sides in and around Melbourne.
Yeah.
And yes, some of that comes down to success. Like Heidelberg's been magnificent the last few seasons. Bentley's been magnificent the last few seasons. South Melbourne aren't smashing the NPL in Victoria every single season. That's not the reality. It would be a huge step up for them to make an A-League competition. I would argue this is the very top of needs improvement, and this is like one of those, similar to the Gold Coast, this is a surefire bet for a national second division, but I don't think an A-League licence or a W League licence is what we'd want to look at in terms of our prioritisation of the bids around the country.
Yeah, I think definitely towards the top of needs improvement. And like you said, would be perfect for a second division. I think a lot of old NSL clubs who now play NPL and are pretty successful from NSL and NPL days deserve a shot at that second division. But yeah, I think, like you said, you're only going to be bringing back fans who are previously connected from the NSL or from families that were previously connected to NSL and NPL now. I don't think you're going to be getting too many new fans or people jumping ship from the existing teams in Melbourne. So yeah, probably need some improvement and get rid of the athletics ring as well.
Yeah, if they can. I don't think they can because I think they need that revenue, but it doesn't make for a good footballing experience. I can tell you that right now. So jumping forward to another South, but the very controversial Southern expansion. This was an early favourite in the expansion race. I'll be completely honest with you, Alex, and I'll let you speak a little bit further about this bid being based in Sydney. I don't know who was actually considering it the favourite. It didn't seem to have much fan support. It didn't seem to have much club support from other existing clubs in the region. Their hopes suffered a serious downturn in the last months of the bidding process, as they had kind of like a last-ditch attempt to merge with the Southwest Sydney bid. There were originally a Macarthur bid and a Southwest Sydney bid that merged. Southern Expansion tried to kind of swoop in on that. There was also challenges from Wollongong Wolves, who we'll talk about further in a moment as well, where they were not supportive of the Southern Expansion bid. It had Les Murray's backing at the time. It had Craig Foster's backing at the time. It apparently had a lot of money behind it with Maurice Yema, previous New South Wales. Was he there? What was he? Premier? He was, yeah.
Yeah.
He was involved, so it had a lot of cash, but didn't necessarily have any identity. Southern Expansion is a very vague term for where they were going to be set up and based. It didn't have buy-in from the local clubs or anything like that we've discussed with Team 11. There was also, I think, an attack from Sydney FC about them encroaching on their exact fan base by trying to set themselves up in a region that Sydney FC had effectively called its own. It was included in the final 8 bids, but it didn't make it to the final 6 that were originally taken through in August 2018. I'll hand over to you, Alex. You're based in Sydney. You know the New South Wales football scene a lot better than I do. Southern Expansion, what were some of your thoughts, feelings when that bid was announced, and what do you think the challenges, or really the benefits that it could have potentially offered the league during its time?
You're probably going to get a lot of bias from me on this bid. I didn't like it. Not a single bit. For me, also, it was weird to see an expansion bid for a non-existent team when you have Wollongong Wolves, who we will mention, not get the backing from people like Craig Foster and stuff like that. So there was a lot of confusion in the sense that you could just back a team that exists and pool your money together and work with Wollongong Wolves. But in terms of the bid itself, I think they had backing from Hong Kong investors as well. So there was a fair bit of money coming in. They were looking at covering a pretty wide area. So down the way of Wollongong as well, but all the way up to Sutherland, which is where it encroaches on Sydney FC's fans. The Sutherland Shire is a pretty big area for Sydney FC fans, which is probably why Sydney FC weren't too pleased about it.
And I think David Gallop was obsessed with Sutherland Shire for quite a while in terms of different expansion bids throughout the years. I think it was like his pet project was the Sutherland Shire, and specifically. If I can be devil's advocate here, so bias is fine because we call it out all the time. And you, Alex, have unfortunately had to listen to Brand and myself rant about Melbourne City 10 times already in the first 2 weeks of the channel. But I think where I'll be devil's advocate, right, is if you're a Craig Foster, if you're a Les Murray, and you've got people that are potentially investors willing to put money into the game, but they're only willing to put money into one weird bid that doesn't quite exist yet, I wonder if it's do they make a decision and say, okay, we're going to support this bid because money in the game is good for the game? Or is it just those investors were only really looking at the Sutherland Shire as an expansion region for other business opportunities and not really willing to invest in Wollongong or something like that? They're not necessarily looking at it from, we want to invest in football. It's more, we want to invest in this particular area. So if I can be the advocate for Craig Foster, who's done a lot of good stuff for football, and he's definitely like rebranded himself over the last 5 or 6 years. But I think they may potentially have just been looking at, we have this potential for investment from Hong Kong, from prominent people in New South Wales government in previous years. How do we secure them in football? Well, this is the only bid that they're willing to support, so we might as well go with it. So I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think this goes in the bin, having said all that positive stuff. But I don't think we need new franchises appearing in Sydney itself. I think Western Sydney made sense for the time, and I think it made sense that Parramatta Power or anything like that wasn't brought back. I think Western Sydney's been great. I think MacArthur's now another new bid. I think we're now at the point where, okay, there's a lot of footballing history in Sydney in and around the NPL side, some of which we'll talk about in a moment as well. You've already mentioned Wollongong. But we've done the new club thing now in Sydney. We now need to start, creating links between existing clubs, existing infrastructure, and, what is the new A-League. It's only really when we bring them both together and align them that we're going to be successful in terms of not just the A-League itself, but also a national second division, hopefully an expanded W League, hopefully an expanded youth league, all that sort of stuff. Have you got any arguments to maybe putting it higher than get in the bin?
Oh, I was going to say put it in get in the bin as a joke, expecting you to want it to put it higher. So I'm happy for it to be in the bin. I mean, they could push up a little bit because of the investment they were looking like they were going to get, and they had a lot of backing from some ex-high profile players and football pundits and stuff like that. But yeah, I think they hadn't defined a central location they were going to be based. They were looking at covering a lot of area and stuff like that, and yeah, I think there's a lot going on in Sydney in terms of football. So I'm not sure if it would have worked.
Maybe I'll put it this way, right? Look at all the bids that we've got in All-Star, Decent, and Needs Improvement. Are there any bids there that you would see Southern Expansion go into the league ahead of?
I mean, apparently they were a favourite, so maybe. But
but like, who's favourite? It might have been a favourite because they were the FFA's favourite rather than the reality.
I think it would have been FFA's favourite. I don't think any fans would have liked to see it. Yeah, I'm happy for it to be in the bin.
We've got to build out that bin. We've got to put the bottom of the bin in. It's not worse than Southeast Asia. And I think if there are Southern Expansion fans or Southern Shire fans that want to come and argue it being in needs improvement, then by all means, let us know your list in the comment section below. Again, the link to this tier list maker will be in the description as well. But yeah, I think this one's in the bin, particularly as we talk through the final three, which I think are, kind of the stronger of the bids that we've had available today. The first of which is, and I've got to give a shout out first to the person that designed this logo. This is Tasmania. We've gone with Tasmania United. This was designed by Michael Taylor Design in 2015. I found it on an old Expand the A-League forum on Facebook. If you don't follow Expand the A-League on Facebook, please go and check it out. They do some fantastic work. There will be a link to their stuff in the comment section below as well. He did a whole bunch of different crest redesigns, including an expanded 14-team competition in 2015. So I basically took this logo because I thought it looked cool. There isn't really any specific club logo available in Tasmania, nor are they confirmed to be Tasmania United, but Tasmania is an area that has consistently come up as being an area that wants to be involved in the A-League. They had attempted bids in 2005. They were one of the original sides that was competing with the Central Coast for a regional license. They didn't get to the final bid stage. It was already kind of signalled that it was going to be the Central Coast just because of the logistical challenges. They previously tried to join in 2012 when the ill-fated Sydney Rovers side was going to be added to the competition, and they tried again in 2018. So there's obviously a long-term view in that state that they really want A-League representation. At the time of the 2018 bid, there were no A-League, AFL, W League, NRL, NBL, WNBL, NRL, or Super Rugby sides playing football, playing any sort of sport in Tasmania. They couldn't even get, one-off games from any of those competitions in 2018. It has now changed. There is now an NBL side that has moved. The Jumping Jacks, I think they're going to be called, which is the worst name in probably Australian sports. Football is very well supported in the state. There's high participation rates amongst both boys and girls across the entirety of the state. Hobart and Launceston are launching this as a joint bid where most games will be played in Hobart, but a few go into the regional area of Launceston as their second biggest city. They have a long history of cooperation as well with sporting fixtures and state-based sponsorship for different teams to go and play games in the Tasmanian market. They have vocal very vocal local government support at both the council and state level, but they do require some further federal funding. There are concerns around the suitability of Blundstone Arena, the biggest oval stadium in Hobart. It is really the only big oval that they've got. But there is potential that a smaller rectangular stadium has been mooted before the bid has been confirmed. And there have been further developments since 2018 for their state football centre, which is based just in the northern suburbs of Hobart, that potentially it could have a little bit more expansion to add, additional stands to it to make it an 8,000 to 10,000 seat arena. But again, that would probably be key and critical to federal funding and getting an A-League licence itself. This bid was part of the initial 15. It did not make it to the final 10, and it did not make it to the final 8. What are some of your thoughts and opinions on Tasmania as a region, its representation within football, and its suitability for A-League and W-League expansion?
When I heard that there was potential for Tasmania to be involved, I think it was one of my early favourites that I wanted to see in the league. Because it's not really a place that sport gets played in any of the major codes. I mean, you've got Big Bash, and now you have NBL going to be playing out there as well. But in terms the major codes in Australia generally are your AFL, rugby union, rugby league, and football. So for no one else to give representation to Tasmania, it's an untapped market, similar to what Darwin would be like, but an untapped market that probably has more realistic opportunity in terms of success. I'd love to see Tasmania get one. I think splitting games between Hobart and Launceston potentially isn't the best idea. Maybe if they only are playing a handful of games down in up in Launceston, it would be okay, and then generally get based out of Hobart.
So
but I think people would
devil's
support
advocate on that one, right? So this is just devil's advocate. I'm not having a go, but is it?
No, I love it.
Is it that different to the way that Sydney have split their games between Kogarah and Jubilee and Allianz over the last couple of seasons? I know there's redevelopment works that's driving that, but if fans are fans, they're going to go where they're going to go.
That's very true, yeah. But then is it that Sydney FC is an established club who are probably in their most successful period ever? Would fans travel back when Frank Farina was coaching?
Yeah,
and we were finishing outside the finals? Maybe not.
If there was two Tasmanian teams, probably not. But because it's one Tasmanian side, they're not cannibalising their own support. If you're a football fan, that's the team that you support in that area. I don't think... This is where I'll, again, be devil's advocate for the FFA. And I cringe every time I do this, and I hate doing it because David Gallop, whatever, I'm glad we're seeing the back of him. But I think potentially they were so burnt by their previous small market entries in Gold Coast and North Queensland that they just wanted something in the most recent bid process that was a sure thing. And additional teams in Melbourne and Sydney were sure things from a broadcasting perspective, from an investment perspective, for the money and backing that they had. And they know that the teams in Melbourne and the additional derbies are successful for the league itself. Why that rationale isn't applied to Brisbane or Adelaide or Perth, I don't know. When derbies would probably help improve the game across the country, just instead of in Sydney and Melbourne. But I think they were perhaps erring too far on the side of caution. And now, where we could have kind of struck while the iron is hot and gotten a leapfrog on the NBL and a leapfrog on the Big Bash, which was still in its infancy, we're now playing catch-up to both of those sides. It would not surprise me if Tasmania is in the next round, because other sides are proving that they can do it. The Big Bash has been there and comfortable with the Hobart Hurricanes for the last few seasons. They look to be doing quite well and get good crowds on a regular basis. It'll be interesting to see how the NBL side plays out. The NBL has a very aggressive expansion strategy. They are doing some things that I would love to see as far as football is concerned in the last few years. They've got, I think, a very aggressive head of Basketball Australia, or head of the NBL, that's doing some fantastic things. If we do it now, it just looks like we're doing it reactionarily to what other codes have done rather than trying to blaze a trail on our own. I would, personally, and I'm happy to be sold on it on you, I would put this in All-Star. I would say, if you were going to ask me today, who do I want to see next? I'd be like, Canberra and Tassie, and then after that, I want to see second division sides. But I'm happy to, again, defer to you as to where you think this one sits in its appropriate tier.
I think I'm happy to agree. Like I said, it was one of my favourites. The only question mark I could raise to it is splitting games the answer? And I mean, if Launceston don't get any sport, I don't think they've had a couple AFL games. But I mean, if you've got a Hobart-based team, or if you call it Tasmania United, it doesn't mean that people in Launceston won't get behind it, because they will get games and stuff like that. So I think it would work. I think it's a great team. I think Canberra, for me, beats it. but a team I'd like to see in the league. And yeah, like I said, when initial interest came out and there were talks of Tasmania joining, I thought, what awesome team to join it. What an away day it would be. Would love to go down to Tassie to watch football.
Yeah,
And
I love Hobart. Hobart's great. If I could go to Hobart for an away day, it'd probably be my favourite away day every year.
I think so.
It would be fantastic. Yeah. So I think All Star's fair, but I do think it also sits behind Canberra United in terms of the suitability. Just because Canberra seems to already have the infrastructure, seems to already have the backing, seems to already have consistent football support. Whereas I think Tasmania needs to be in the league, but I think maybe it's one of those things like it's a domino effect. Once they get that license, then maybe the state government comes, then maybe the federal funding comes, then maybe the stadium comes. So I think bottom of All Star is fine as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But, we got through it. We get through these difficult ones as best we can, Alex, and we go again. We'll just wait for the angry comments to come throughout the course of the week. Jumping forward now to another second side in a city that already exists, West Adelaide Soccer Club. I have used the West Adelaide logo. Now, there is a little bit of conjecture as to whether this is the existing West Adelaide Football Club or a separate West Adelaide entity. It was never really confirmed. If you do know, if you're in the know in South Australian football, by all means, let us know in the comments section below. But West Adelaide were a former NSL team. The star represented on their logo here represents their one title win in the old NSL. They announced their intention to enter the league as a second Adelaide team, and advances were made to past Liverpool player Robbie Fowler to be their manager. Some say that is a precursor to his eventual ill-fated stint at Brisbane Roar. It's believed to have the backing by an English-based consortium, and that was going to give them a $100 million budget for an A-League, W-League and Youth League side, including the building and production of a training facility, which may have been at an existing site for West Adelaide Soccer Club, and a similar upgrade to their existing stadium. The standalone bid had no connection to the NSL club Adelaide City that had previously signalled an intent to join the A-League, and it actually relied on a very similar model to Melbourne City. I don't know what ownership group this would be, but apparently they have clubs that they already own in Africa. They had a club that they already owned in Asia, a smaller percentage, and this would be their first standalone club that they were building from the ground up. The investment would hopefully see them work with those clubs in the global network, which would be interesting to see. I think Melbourne City, for all its detractors and all the frustrations, and I get why other teams take shots at it, I think it's been good for the league in terms of its visibility with other sides around the world. And I think it's been good for the league in terms of we have, now an EPL standard training facility in Melbourne that, Melbourne Victory have now tried to catch up to. Sydney FC tried to catch up to. Western United have opened their own development centre. A lot of clubs have kind of moved to a different tier of their own facilities, both training and playing. But West Adelaide, it's a little bit uncertain as to where they would actually sit. I know there was a football group that owned Charlton that had very difficulties, that owned a few different clubs. Because there is kind of a murky nature as to what they would actually bring to the league, it does kind of make this one a challenging one to rank. They were included in the final 8 bids considered by the FFA, but did not make it to the final 6. Alex, what are some of your thoughts on West Adelaide and their kind of mysterious bid as we try and discuss it and put it into a tier list?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you that it's very mysterious, because a lot of it on face value, if you assume that the 100 million is definitely coming and that it's part of a bigger football consortium and stuff like that, then by all means it makes a lot of sense and it's an established team. But there's so many question marks about, well, who is this football group? Is that money, are they actually going to get 100 million? Because that's a lot of money to do a lot with. Is it the existing team? Is it a new team? For me, I think there's too many question marks on it. I find it. I don't know. Do we rank it next to the talks of an Adelaide team?
Here's what I'll suggest. Right, let's put it here next to second Adelaide. Right, but then when we get through the next one, which is the final one, once we've done that, let's go back and have a look at our different tiers and see if we want to put them in a different order. So I think it goes in decent, but I'm not 100% sure if it sits above Western Pride, Brisbane City, second Perth, Team 11 Geelong. So maybe we put it on that platform now, and then let's review that order once we have everything on the board.
All right, let's do that.
Because the next one is potentially the most challenging one that we have to discuss. It is the Wollongong Wolves. For a lot of people, it is their personal favourite to actually join an expanded A-League competition. They already have a 23,000 seat capacity stadium. The rectangular Wynn Stadium has hosted A-League games previously, has been a fantastic FFA Cup journey and venue when the Wollongong Wolves have done well in that competition. The Wollongong population is close to 300,000 people, more than capable of sustaining its own national team competition. They have fantastic records in the old NSL. winning championships in a few different seasons. They have been a constant nomination for A-League expansion, albeit sometimes by fans rather than by the actual bid team themselves. There is believed that they have significant backing from a few different millionaires, including, I think, the 17th richest man in Australia or something like that. They have also signalled their intent and interest in a national second division. They are part of the championship group that's come through in the last 6 months. South Coast Football Federation has pledged their support behind a Wollongong bid as opposed to behind a Southern Expansion bid or an additional Sydney bid. They have former Socceroos Scott Chipperfield and Adam Federici that already act as ambassadors for the club. Federici, of course, returning to Macarthur, potentially could have returned to Wollongong Wolves if things had gone correctly. Luke Wilshire was their previous coach. I think he's moved on. He might still be there. You can correct me on that, Alex, if you know for sure. They were part of the final 8 bids. They did not make it to the final 6. Obviously, Alex, a lot of people's sentimental favourite. What are some of your experiences with Wollongong as they stand currently now? What do you think they would bring to the league if they were added into it?
For me, this was my favourite of every bid. And it sounds weird as a person coming from Sydney, but it's separate from Southern Expansion because it didn't try to encroach on anyone else's existing fan bases. It is separate from Sydney, obviously established in Wollongong. They don't try and take fans from anywhere else, generally outside their greater area. An established old NSL club. They get fans. FFA Cup games, Sydney FC played them a couple seasons into the FFA Cup, and there was a decent crowd on a midweek night. So obviously people want to see football there. Some NRL gets played there, but an area that likes sport, high participation rates, backed by the local football governing body. It just made sense. And so for me, when you hear that Southern Expansion is the favourite of probably just the FFA, it made no sense to me why the Wollongong Wolves weren't the favourite instead. I would have loved to see them in the league. I think now that you have a third Sydney team, you probably can't give them the licence. But definitely probably the first name for me, or one of the first names on the second division list.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think they are right. If it was an ideal world and we got to throw 5 teams in the league, I think they go in. But because realistically we know from history it's likely going to be 2 as the next expansion. I don't think, based on Macarthur going into the league, that we need Wollongong right now. But that's not to say their bid isn't great. This is, again, one of those tough things where we kind of set ourselves the rules that we weren't going to talk about previous bids. Wollongong Wolves was a superior bid to Macarthur. Team 11 was a superior bid to Western United. Canberra, Tasmania, probably superior bids to both of those as well. But the FFA made its decisions, and now we're kind of in an environment where we have to deal with the reality of their decisions. And it's not necessarily a reflection of us not wanting Wollongong to be represented in the league. There is a part of me as well that thinks their story is complete if they go through expansion bids in 2005, 2012, 2018, 2020, 2021, whatever it ends up being. They only get themselves into the second division, and then the first season they win the second division and take their rightful place in the A-League. I think that goes into the narrative of the struggles that they've got, and I think they would potentially win the first division, given that they are a very well-run club. What we've done in this tier list is we've taken clubs like South Melbourne, that we say being top of the second division. I think a case could be made to put Wollongong Wolves in the all-star category. I think a case could be made to put Wollongong Wolves in the decent category. It's just where we think best suits them. I think Sydney and Melbourne have had their time. So I'm kind of looking at it now thinking this probably goes alongside just ahead of Team 11, because we don't need more Sydney and we don't need more Melbourne. I know Wollongong fans is a separate area to Sydney itself. If I was picking and we could put 5 of our own clubs, I'd probably put Wollongong up in All-Star. I'd probably put Team 11 up in All-Star. But the reality is we now have to kind of manage based on the decisions that the league has made, the decision the FFA has made. And I think for that instance, I would put it next to Team 11 towards the bottom of decent. Not because it's not a great bid, not because it isn't an all-star bid, but because I think where we're at right now, we need more Perth teams, we need more Brisbane teams, we need more Adelaide sides, we need Tasmania and Canberra represented before we start looking further into New South Wales, further into Victoria. What do you think?
I think if you look at the ranking rules, I think the market, perfect. I think benefits to the league, perfect again, bit of history back. And suitability, again, perfect. They're backed by their local football governing body. They've got a stadium that they play at all the time. They're not going to lose that stadium. But I think I think the only thing that kills it is the fact that Macarthur got a license. And so now you go, well, we can't give them the chance over a second Brisbane or a second Adelaide or a second Perth team instead of a fourth New South Wales or like a Greater Sydney based team. I want to put them in All Star so badly, but yeah, I think it makes sense along with Team 11.
Yeah, I feel you. Look, I would put them in All-Star if we could. But I think we've set ourselves, we were not too harsh. I think we've gone through it very logically in a lot of these respects, but we then have to be consistent with it. We can't just go and take it out. But I do hope, if there's a national second division, Wollongong should be top of that list. They should be the first name on that list. And I hope they win it. And I hope they get themselves into the A-League the long way via promotion. And then they can stick it back up everyone saying that they've taken their rightful spot rather than being handed it. And again, maybe they've run a very good club. I think there's a lot of credit that needs to be given to the likes of Wollongong Wolves, South Melbourne, Gold Coast United, even Townsville, the rebranded Fury side. They have continued football in their region regardless of A-League backing. So I think there's very clear that they've got that motivation to continue being a football club and a football community, regardless of whether they're playing at an elite tier or an NPL tier. So they deserve a ton of credit. I think we can both say, reluctantly, we're not putting them in All-Star, we're reluctantly putting them in decent, but they have a tremendous bid, and we hope to see them on a national stage sooner rather than later. So what we have to do now is go on back and review our different tiers. So our All-Star tier, Canberra, Tasmania United, I'm fine with that, and I'm fine with the order that we've got them on. Are you cool?
Yeah, that works for me.
All-Star's fine. I think getting the bin is fine. Southern Expansion, Southeast Asia, I think that's sorted. I don't think we need to adjust anything there. Are you cool with that one?
Yeah, that's fine for me as well. If we could create another category for the Southeast Asia, I would, but I don't think it gets worse than getting in the bin. So
the ultimate disrespect we could do is just not put it on the board entirely, and I could just put it back down here. If it lets me do that, it won't let me do it, but that's fine. But maybe next time when we talk about Southeast Asia, we just ignore it and don't speak of it. Needs improvement. We've got South Melbourne, Auckland, Cairns, Darwin, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast United, and Townsville. Gold Coast United and Townsville at the bottom of that because we want to see new opportunities given rather than revisiting old ones. Any there that jump out at you that think maybe we've gotten wrong or maybe we need to adjust?
I don't know. Maybe Darwin gets a little higher up instead of Auckland or Cairns because it doesn't have any team representation at all. But does the climate play into them going back down? I don't know.
So here's what I'll argue there, right? I think moving it up is fair. I've got actually a couple that I'm going to suggest to you now, and I'm going to do this as a quick spiel, right? I think Geelong comes down. I think Geelong goes to needs improvement. I think Darwin goes to the top of that group. I think potentially South Melbourne, and we'll talk about this one maybe separately, maybe can go up. If we're talking about Auckland, I kind of am now starting to think we've said second Adelaide, we've said second Brisbane, we've said second Perth. Maybe instead of Auckland, we should have said second New Zealand. And it's a second team to try and introduce a derby in that area, because I think where we have, Darwin is a very unknown bid. It's a very unknown area in terms of how it's represented on the national stage. We are in a period of unknowns as how winter competition is going to work in those areas. I would put Auckland ahead of it, but it's Auckland with the kind of asterisk next to it saying that we're talking about a second New Zealand team, not necessarily specific to Auckland. And maybe I should have put this graphic together a little bit differently. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. If you look at it as a general second New Zealand-based team, if Auckland might be the answer for that. But yeah, if we're going to be offering Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane the chance, I think I'll offer those cities first. But I think, if they could do it, I think it would be nice to have another team over in New Zealand. And South Melbourne, I wouldn't put them above any of the actual team bids up in decent, but I could see them being towards the bottom of decent because they would be perfect for a second national tier.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we said things about Wollongong and how we want them in a second tier competition. That probably also apply to South Melbourne, and because South Melbourne fans are South Melbourne fans, they're probably already screaming in the comment section below that we're being hypocritical. So I think Geelong comes down because there's unknowns about that bid, and Western United has kind of cannibalised that region a little bit. And I think South Melbourne goes up to decent in their place, but at the bottom of decent.
Yeah.
Then we go to the rest of the decent category, and probably the big challenge here. I think Wollongong Team 11 South Melbourne at the end is fine. Do you have any concerns about moving them ahead of any of the second city teams?
I think if you look at them purely as their bids, I think Team 11 and Wollongong probably deserve to be up the top. But if you're looking at it in terms of which city deserves a team, they're areas that are too populated by teams. So
here's what I'll come back with that, right? We're looking at A-League expansion and not a National Second Division expansion. So I think either we put Wollongong Team 11 and South Melbourne all at the top of decent and the second Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth sides behind that, or we put the second Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth sides at the top of decent and the other three behind it. I'm happy with either one. It's whatever you think the best call is. If you think Wolves, Team 11 and South Melbourne bring more to the league itself than second teams in some of these cities, and to be honest with you, I think those three bids are stronger than any of the bids submitted previously just because they are a bit mysterious. Then what we'll do is we'll split into our last conversation, what order we want to put these second teams in and second bids in.
I think a potential for teams in those other cities probably brings more to league because you create derbies, you create a bit of friction, and like you said, when it seems like when a second team gets added to a city, it pushes the original team on to be more successful. I mean, when Western Sydney came in, it spurred on Sydney to their most successful period. And then the establishment of Heart, now City as well, have pushed Victory on to be one of the most successful in the competition as well. And you've got City establishing, like you said, really awesome training facilities and making the final and stuff like that. They've got an FFA Cup. So I think the potential for teams in those areas is probably more important to the league. It's just I think the actual bids from those towns I think are worse than the Wollongong and Team 11 and South Melbourne.
Okay, so what if we
you get what I mean?
No, I do, and I agree with you. I think maybe we move it like this. So second Adelaide, second Brisbane, second Perth is our preference, right? That's what we want.
Even though the actual bids, the bids from those towns are mysterious. Yeah, so
that's more important to us. But then maybe we put Wollongong, Team 11, South Melbourne next on the strength of their actual bids. And now the last portion that we have to talk about is of West Adelaide, Western Pride and Brisbane City, which of these bids is strongest and which would we like to see in the league if these were the next three that we have to try and order?
I'm thinking, Western Pride was made it through to the 8, did they?
Yeah, so that's Ipswich / Western Pride. I'm not 100% sure if it would be Western Pride if they joined the league, but effectively West Brisbane. And I think I would agree that they had the strongest bid and they did get the furthest in the bidding process. The tough one I think is where do we place West Adelaide? Brisbane City had a good bid but was underfunded. West Adelaide had a very well-funded bid but it was mysterious. Like we don't really know the reality of their bid and their situation.
Yeah, I think in terms of the A-League, the less the more we know about a bid, the better. Because if it's all mysterious and we get 6 months in and it's like, well, the 100 million they promised is not coming, the investors have pulled out and stuff like that, then we're left with a situation where you have a team like the Gold Coast or the Fury who have disbanded pretty quickly and a bit of it would be not great image for the league.
And here's what I'll say. Like we went before City purchased Heart, we knew that the City Football Group was looking at clubs in Australia. Like we knew who it was, and we knew what they were potentially going to bring it, and that made it a little bit more exciting. It's weird that if there is a consortium and a club-based consortium, there aren't that many of them in the world. So unless it's like West Adelaide Red Bull or something like that, and they legally can't tell anybody what they're doing, I don't really understand why it's such a mystery, if that makes sense. I don't know why it was such a mystery as to who that bidding group was and what collection of clubs they would have been joining. So I think that's fair. How do you think decent is looking? Is this looking better or do we need to make an adjustment?
I think it's perfect.
Okay.
I think it runs pretty well. Even though we have the first three of decent being not actual bids, I think the prospect of having teams in those cities is probably the most important. I'd say those three cities are quite high up in terms of having a second team, compared to, like we said, Melbourne and Sydney having third and fourth and fifth teams.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it potentially galvanises Adelaide United, Brisbane Roar and Perth Glory adds an additional bonus benefit and a bonus little ranking that puts them ahead of Wollongong Wolves, Team 11 and South Melbourne. So I think I'm happy with it. I don't this is one of those ones where we could talk about it for another hour and a half and still not be 100% happy and 100% clear. But I think this is probably as close as we're going to get. We'd be arguing minutiae on any remaining details. So there it is, everyone. The definitive A-League expansion candidates tier list. We want next, as far as the reserve team's concerned. I can already tell we're going to head back into the Slack channel after this, and people are going to be furious about the order that we've put stuff in, but that's fine. But we want Canberra United, Tasmania as the next two, and then we want to see expansion sides in Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth, and then hopefully a national second division for the likes of Wollongong Wolves, South East Melbourne, South Melbourne, Western Pride, Brisbane City, West Adelaide, and a bunch of other different regional areas that we think could bring quite a bit to the league itself. Both A-League and W-League and Youth League and whatever other NPL competitions they can join in as well. Alex, final real thoughts from you on A-League expansion as a whole, like what you'd like to see play out over the next few years and what your hopes might be for not just, the two sides that have joined us most recently, Western United and MacArthur, but the next sides as well that we could potentially see in the league itself.
Yeah, I think like most A-League fans, the sooner we can continue to expand the league, not just in its single division, but to a second division, the better. I think with where we're at, with everything at the moment, it's going to take a bit of time to get all that happening and get the ball rolling. But I think, eventually we're going to have to get to a level of, like I said at the start, about 16 teams, and then that second division can come in. And once that happens and we get promotion, relegation, and the football pyramid is all aligned, we're good to go. I think that's when Australian football will start to hit its peak. And I think for me, the next two teams I'd like to see in, because usually we either go by one team or two teams when they get added, I think would be Canberra and Tasmania. And hopefully this season, MacArthur, if crowds are allowed, can get some good support and have a decent first season. Yeah,
of course. We've got to keep our fingers crossed that we get more donut days over the next couple of days, weeks, months, so that hopefully by the end of December, we can get some fans back in stadiums watching football. I think the other thing that we probably didn't touch on it enough is that we've got a World Cup coming up within 3 years. Like, if there is ever a strike while the iron is hot time, we're kind of probably in that prime now. Like, we want to have a proper 14-team national division. We want to have a proper, hopefully 10 to 12-team W League as well. Obviously, some teams and some challenges there with Central Coast and Wellington coming forward and wanting to have a W League team is fantastic. But in reality, like, we need more for both of those competitions. We need a longer W League season. We need a longer A League season. And we need some stability that hopefully these clubs can offer over the next few years. I'm proud of the list, Alex. I think we've done as good a job as anyone has ever done in terms of ranking expansion candidates. Of course, for everybody that's watching, you can let us know your expanded candidates, your preferences in the comment section below. In the description to this video will be a link to this tier maker. You can go and make your own and submit them to us over on Twitter as well. From myself, from Alex, from everybody at the reserve team, thanks as always for continuing to support our content, both here and on the website, and now on Spotify as well, if anyone wants to go and check out an audio-only version of this show, which would be weird. But really, more than anything, we just appreciate you guys watching. Thanks as always, and we'll see you all again next time.